In a small, lively town nestled between rolling hills and vast fields, life moved at its own unhurried pace. The streets were lined with modest homes, and the air buzzed with the chatter of neighbors exchanging pleasantries. Among them lived Maria Rodriguez, a bright-eyed teenager who carried an unshakable optimism, despite her family's humble circumstances. Her father, Eduardo, worked long hours as the janitor at the local high school, ensuring every classroom sparkled by morning. Though his job didn't pay much, Eduardo poured all his love into providing for Maria, often skipping meals just so she could have new notebooks or a warm coat during winter. Maria was different from most kids her age. While others spent their afternoons playing video games or scrolling through social media, she found joy in simpler things, watching birds flutter outside her window, sketching pictures in worn-out notebooks, or listening intently to music on her father's old stereo. It wasn't anything fancy, a hand-me-down device that crackled when turned up too loud, but it brought magic into their tiny apartment. On quiet evenings, Eduardo would sit beside Maria, humming along to classical tunes he barely understood but enjoyed nonetheless. He'd tell her stories about famous musicians whose names she struggled to pronounce, planting seeds of wonder in her young mind. At school, Maria kept mostly to herself. She wasn't part of any cliques or sports teams, nor did she crave attention. Instead, she observed everything around her. The way sunlight streamed through the library windows, how teachers smiled differently at certain students, and the subtle hierarchies among classmates based on wealth, popularity, or talent. As the daughter of the school janitor, Maria knew where she stood in this invisible pecking order, near the bottom. But she didn't let it bother her. If anything, it fueled her determination to prove that worth wasn't defined by one's background. One chilly afternoon, while helping her father clean out a storage closet filled with forgotten supplies, Maria stumbled upon something unusual, an old violin tucked away in a dusty case. Its strings were frayed, and the wood bore scratches from years of neglect, but there was something mesmerizing about it. "What's this?" she asked curiously, holding it up for her father to see. Eduardo chuckled softly. "That? Oh, it's been lying around forever. No one uses it anymore." He paused, then added with a twinkle in his eye, "But maybe you should give it a try." The idea stuck with Maria like glue. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about the violin. Maybe it was the challenge of learning something completely new, or perhaps it was the thought of creating beauty with her own hands. Either way, she decided to ask Mr. Thompson, the orchestra director, if she could borrow it. When she finally mustered the courage to approach him, he raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You want to play violin?" he asked, clearly surprised. Before she could answer, another teacher nearby chimed in with a laugh. "Well, maybe playing violin will teach her some discipline." Everyone chuckled except Maria, who felt a pang of embarrassment, but also resolve. Little did they know, this offhand remark would set off a chain of events none of them could have predicted. For Maria, it wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about discovering what she was truly capable of. And deep down, she believed she had more to offer than anyone realized. Maria's secret practice sessions became a quiet rhythm in her life, blending seamlessly with the humdrum of school days and evenings spent helping her father. Each day brought new challenges, sore fingers, awkward bowing techniques, and melodies that refused to sound right, no matter how hard she tried. But Maria didn't give up. Instead, she embraced every mistake as part of the process, determined to transform those discordant notes into something beautiful. One afternoon, while practicing in an empty classroom during lunch, Maria heard footsteps approaching. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly lowered the violin, expecting a teacher or student to walk in and scold her for using the space without permission. But instead, it was Mrs. Harper, the art teacher who had stumbled upon her playing weeks earlier. The older woman stood in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and smiling warmly. "Don't stop on my account," she said gently. "I just wanted to see if you were still at it." Reluctantly, Maria raised the violin again, and began playing a simple tune she'd been working on. Her movements were hesitant at first, but as the music flowed, her confidence grew. When she finished, Mrs. Harper clapped softly, her eyes shining with admiration. "You've improved so much," she said sincerely. "You have a real gift, Maria." For a moment, Maria felt a surge of pride, but it was quickly tempered by the knowledge that not everyone shared Mrs. Harper's opinion. Later that week, whispers about Maria's violin practice began to circulate among the faculty. Some teachers were genuinely impressed by her dedication, especially after Mrs. Harper recounted how Maria practiced alone, often skipping meals to squeeze in extra time with the instrument. Others, however, remained skeptical. "It's cute that she's trying," one remarked dismissively during a staff meeting, "but let's be realistic. She's not exactly orchestra material." Another chimed in, laughing lightly. "Maybe we should applaud her effort and move on." These comments reached Maria indirectly, carried by the grapevine of hallway gossip. One day, as she walked past the teacher's lounge, she overheard snippets of their conversation. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, and for a fleeting moment, doubt crept into her mind. Was she wasting her time? Could she ever measure up to their expectations? But then she remembered why she started: to prove to herself, more than anyone else, that she could rise above limitations others placed on her. Determined not to let negativity derail her progress, Maria threw herself even deeper into practice. She began experimenting with more complex pieces, challenging herself to master songs that seemed impossible at first. Late at night, when the rest of the neighborhood slept, she sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, replaying difficult sections until her fingers ached. Eduardo, noticing her relentless drive, offered words of encouragement. "You're doing something amazing, Maija," he told her one evening, his voice filled with pride. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Meanwhile, Mrs. Harper continued to champion Maria's cause. She mentioned Maria's talent to Mr. Thompson, the orchestra director, urging him to consider her for the upcoming spring concert auditions. At first, Mr. Thompson was hesitant. "She's only been playing for a few months," he pointed out. "The other students have years of experience. It wouldn't be fair to them, or to her, if she isn't ready." But Mrs. Harper persisted. "Give her a chance," she urged. "You might be surprised." As the days passed, Maria became increasingly aware of the mixed reactions she inspired. Some students whispered behind her back, calling her efforts cute or admirable, as though they couldn't imagine her succeeding. A few even went out of their way to mock her, hiding her sheet music or leaving snide notes in her locker. Yet, amidst the negativity, there were also moments of unexpected kindness. A senior named Clara, a talented cellist in the orchestra, approached Maria one afternoon after spotting her practicing in the library. "You're really good," Clara admitted, surprising Maria. "If you ever need help, I'd be happy to show you some techniques." These small acts of support buoyed Maria's spirits, reminding her that she wasn't entirely alone in her journey. Though the road ahead was fraught with challenges, she faced each obstacle head-on, fueled by a quiet determination to prove that passion and perseverance could overcome doubt and prejudice. Little did she know, her moment to shine was closer than she thought. And when it arrived, it would leave everyone breathless. Maria didn't waste any time. The very next day, she approached Mr. Thompson again during his free period. This time, she was more prepared. "I know I'm not the best student in school," she began hesitantly, clutching her hands together to hide their trembling. "And I'd never even touched a violin before. But I really want to try. Can I borrow that old one from the storage room?" Her voice wavered slightly, but her eyes shone with determination. Mr. Thompson studied her for a moment, his stern expression softening just a fraction. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed and nodded. "All right, Maria, you can take it, but don't expect miracles overnight." That evening, as Eduardo swept the last bits of dust from the school's hallways, Maria sat cross-legged on the floor of their tiny apartment, cradling the battered violin in her lap. It looked even older under the dim light of their single bulb, its once polished wood now dull and scratched. She ran her fingers gently over the strings, plucking them one by one to hear the faint notes they produced. They sounded tinny and out of tune, but to Maria, they were magical. She had no idea where to start, so she turned to the only resource she knew, the internet. For hours, Maria watched free tutorials on her phone, mimicking the instructor's hand positions and bow movements as best she could. At first, the sounds she made were far from music, more like screeches and awkward squeaks that made her wince. Her fingers slipped constantly, and the bow felt foreign in her grip. By the end of the night, her fingertips were red and sore, and her arms ached from holding the instrument incorrectly. But instead of feeling discouraged, Maria smiled. Every mistake was a step closer to getting it right. The following days became a routine. Maria woke up early, helped her father tidy the house, and then spent every spare moment practicing. During lunch breaks at school, she'd sneak into empty classrooms, setting up near a corner where no one could see her. She played softly, afraid of drawing attention, but the sound still echoed faintly through the halls. One afternoon, Mrs. Harper, the kind-hearted art teacher, happened to walk past. Hearing the faint strains of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, she stopped mid-step, intrigued. Peeking inside, she saw Maria hunched over the violin, her brow furrowed in concentration. Mrs. Harper watched silently for a few minutes, marveling at the girl's focus. When Maria finally noticed her, she froze, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Oh, I'm sorry," she stammered, lowering the violin quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." Mrs. Harper shook her head, smiling warmly. "Don't apologize, Maria. That was wonderful. Have you been learning this all by yourself?" Maria nodded shyly, unsure of how to respond. Encouraged by the compliment, she admitted, "It's hard, but I like it. I think I'm getting better. Maybe." Word of Maria's secret practice sessions began to spread, thanks to Mrs. Harper sharing the story with a few colleagues over coffee. Some teachers were genuinely impressed, while others dismissed it as a fleeting hobby. "She'll lose interest soon enough," one remarked casually. Another chimed in, laughing, "Let's see how long she lasts before giving up." These comments reached Maria indirectly, carried by whispers in the hallways or muttered behind closed doors. Each word stung, but instead of letting them crush her spirit, Maria used them as fuel. If they thought she couldn't do it, she would prove them wrong, not out of spite, but because she believed in herself. Her progress wasn't immediate, but it was steady. Slowly, the screeching notes gave way to clearer tones. Simple melodies became easier to play, and her confidence grew with each passing day. Eduardo noticed the change in his daughter. She seemed happier, more alive, as though the violin had unlocked a part of her she hadn't known existed. On nights when she practiced late into the evening, he'd sit quietly nearby, listening with a proud smile. Though he didn't understand much about music, he understood effort, and Maria's dedication was undeniable. Still, challenges loomed ahead. Maria knew she had a long journey before she could call herself a musician. Yet, with every note she coaxed from the old violin, she felt herself inching closer to something extraordinary. What started as a leap of faith, a decision to try something completely unfamiliar, was becoming a defining chapter of her life. And though the road was steep, Maria faced it with unwavering resolve, determined to show the world that talent isn't born, it's built, one step at a time. The days following Maria's audition were a whirlwind of emotions. Word of her performance spread like wildfire through the school, igniting both admiration and jealousy in equal measure. Some students whispered excitedly about how incredible she sounded, while others rolled their eyes, dismissing her success as a fluke. She got lucky, one boy muttered to his friends in the hallway. "There's no way someone like her can keep up with the orchestra." The comment stung, but Maria chose not to let it show. She had faced skepticism before, and she knew that proving herself wouldn't happen overnight. Despite the mixed reactions, Maria earned a spot in the orchestra, a feat that shocked many, including some of the teachers who had doubted her abilities. Mr. Thompson, though impressed by her audition, remained cautious. "You've shown great potential, Maria," he told her during their first meeting after the auditions, "but the orchestra requires discipline and consistency. You'll need to practice harder than ever to stay on par with the others." Maria nodded earnestly, understanding the weight of his words. She wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was carrying the hopes of everyone who believed in her, and silencing those who didn't. Rehearsals quickly became a battleground for Maria. The other members of the orchestra were talented and experienced, and they weren't shy about pointing out her mistakes. During one session, as she struggled to keep up with a particularly fast passage, a snide remark slipped from a fellow violinist. "Maybe you should stick to simpler pieces." Maria felt her cheeks burn, but instead of retreating, she doubled down. After rehearsals ended, she stayed behind in the music room, practicing the same passage over and over until her fingers cramped and her arms ached. By the next rehearsal, she played the section flawlessly, earning a surprised nod from Mr. Thompson and silence from her critic. Her determination didn't go unnoticed. Clara, the senior cellist who had befriended her earlier, often lingered after practice to offer tips. "You're improving so quickly," Clara said one afternoon, watching Maria work through a challenging piece. "Most people would have given up by now, but you just keep going." Maria smiled gratefully, knowing how much Clara's support meant. Even Mrs. Harper continued to champion her, stopping by rehearsals occasionally to cheer her on or leaving encouraging notes in her locker. But challenges came in other forms too. One morning, Maria arrived at school to find her sheet music missing from her bag. At first, she panicked, thinking she'd left it at home, but when she discovered crumpled pages stuffed inside a trash can near her locker, her heart sank. Someone had deliberately sabotaged her. For a moment, anger bubbled inside her. But then she remembered her father's advice: "When people try to bring you down, rise higher." That evening, she painstakingly rewrote the missing sections from memory, refusing to let the incident derail her progress. Even outside the orchestra, Maria faced subtle reminders of her place in the social hierarchy. Teachers sometimes overlooked her contributions in class discussions, and classmates rarely included her in group projects unless required. Yet these slights only strengthened her resolve. She poured every ounce of energy into her music, letting the violin become her voice. Each note she played carried not just melody but meaning, a testament to her resilience and refusal to be defined by others' expectations. As weeks turned into months, Maria's presence in the orchestra began to shift perceptions. Her dedication inspired some of her peers to rethink their assumptions. A few even approached her to ask how she managed to improve so quickly. "It's not talent," she explained humbly. "It's just hard work. I make mistakes all the time, but I don't give up." Her honesty resonated with them, bridging gaps that once seemed insurmountable. By the time preparations for the annual gala began, Maria had earned a new level of respect within the group. When Mr. Thompson announced that she would perform a solo piece, Janitor by Sarasate, the room fell silent. It was a technically demanding composition, one typically reserved for advanced players. Some students exchanged skeptical glances, while others offered quiet words of encouragement. Maria accepted the challenge without hesitation, knowing it was another opportunity to prove herself. The night of the gala loomed large in her mind, a mix of excitement and nerves swirling in her chest. Yet, amidst the pressure, Maria found solace in the knowledge that she wasn't alone. Her father's unwavering support, Mrs. Harper's kindness, Clara's friendship, and her own unshakable belief in herself formed a foundation stronger than any obstacle. As she fine-tuned her performance, she reminded herself why she started this journey. Not to. Years passed, and Maria's journey took her farther than she, or anyone, could have imagined. The small-town girl who once practiced in empty classrooms now stood on grand stages, performing in concert halls that echoed with history and elegance. Her name began to appear in programs alongside renowned musicians, and critics praised her for the raw emotion and unwavering passion she poured into every performance. Yet, despite her growing fame, Maria never forgot where she came from or the people who had shaped her along the way. During breaks between tours and rehearsals, Maria returned home to visit her father, whose hair had grown streaked with gray, but whose smile remained as warm as ever. They spent hours reminiscing about the early days, the screeching notes, the worn-out violin, and the countless nights they had stayed up late talking about dreams bigger than their tiny apartment. Eduardo often joked, "You've made it so far, Maija. Maybe now you can buy us a nicer stereo." Maria would laugh, hugging him tightly, grateful for the sacrifices he had made to give her a chance at something greater. But Maria didn't just come back to relive memories. She came to give back. Inspired by the struggles she had faced as a child, she organized benefit concerts in her hometown, raising funds to support arts programs for underprivileged kids. She partnered with local schools to provide free music lessons, ensuring that no child would be turned away because of cost or circumstance. "Music saved me," she told a reporter during one event. "It gave me hope when I needed it most. I want every child to have that same opportunity." Her efforts sparked a movement. Teachers across the country began incorporating Maria's story into their lessons, using her journey as an example of resilience and determination. Students who might have doubted their own potential saw themselves in her, a reminder that greatness wasn't reserved for those born into privilege. Even Mr. Thompson, now retired, attended one of her concerts and approached her afterward with tears in his eyes. "You've changed lives, Maria, not just your own, but thousands of others. Thank you." Maria also kept in touch with Mrs. Harper and Clara, the two people who had believed in her when few others did. Mrs. Harper, now nearing retirement herself, proudly displayed newspaper clippings of Maria's achievements in her classroom. "Every time I see a student struggling, I tell them your story," she said during one visit. "And they light up, knowing that someone like them made it this far." As for Clara, she became a close friend and occasional collaborator, joining Maria for duets at charity events and sharing laughs over old memories. Despite her success, Maria remained humble, always attributing her achievements to the community that had supported her. In interviews, she spoke openly about the challenges she had faced, the whispers, the sabotage, the moments when self-doubt threatened to overwhelm her. "I didn't succeed because I was special," she often said. "I succeeded because I refused to give up. And I want everyone listening to know, if I can do it, so can you." One summer evening, Maria returned to her alma mater to perform at a special assembly honoring students pursuing careers in the arts. As she walked onto the stage, carrying her prized violin, a gift from a famous musician who had mentored her early in her career, she felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her. The auditorium looked exactly as she remembered it, though the faces in the crowd were new. She played Zajunnerweisen, the piece that had launched her journey years ago, pouring every ounce of emotion into the performance. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, mirroring the standing ovation she had received during her first gala. Afterward, as students lined up to meet her, Maria took time to speak with each one. Many shared their dreams. Some wanted to be musicians, while others aspired to write, paint, or dance. One shy boy hesitated before handing her a crumpled sheet of paper with a song he had written. Maria read it carefully, her eyes lighting up. "This is beautiful," she told him earnestly. "Keep writing. Keep creating. You never know where it might take you." As she left the school that night, Maria paused by the storage closet where she had first discovered the battered violin. It was empty now, cleared out long ago, but its memory lingered vividly in her mind. She smiled softly, thinking about how far she had come since that day, and how much further she hoped to go. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. Maria's legacy wasn't just in the music she created. It was in the lives she touched and the barriers she broke. She proved that talent isn't determined by background, resources, or privilege. It's forged through hard work, courage, and an unshakable belief in oneself. And though she knew there would always be obstacles ahead, she faced them with the aftermath of the gala performance rippled through the school like a wave, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed Maria's solo. The next morning, as she walked down the hallway, whispers followed her. But this time, they weren't laced with mockery or doubt. Instead, students stopped mid-conversation to stare in awe, some even clapping softly as she passed. Teachers greeted her with warm smiles, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect. "Maria, that was extraordinary," Ms. Pidle said during class, breaking protocol to praise her in front of everyone. "You've inspired us all." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when one of the teachers who had initially dismissed Maria approached her after school. It was Mr. Carter, the same teacher who had joked about her playing violin months ago. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, but his words carried sincerity. "Maria, I owe you an apology," he began, his voice low. "I underestimated you, and I was wrong. Your talent and your determination deserve nothing less than admiration." Maria blinked, surprised by the unexpected confession. She nodded slowly, accepting his apology without resentment. "Thank you," she replied simply, her tone gracious. Word of Maria's success didn't stay confined to the school. Local newspapers picked up the story, dubbing her the janitor's daughter who silenced skeptics with her violin. Reporters visited the school, interviewing Maria, her father, and even some of her teachers. Eduardo beamed proudly in every photo, his weathered face glowing with quiet pride. When asked how he felt about his daughter's journey, he responded humbly, "Maria has always been special. All I did was believe in her. The rest is her own hard work." As the attention grew, so did the opportunities. Music schools reached out, offering scholarships and invitations to audition for prestigious programs. At first, Maria felt overwhelmed by the sudden influx of options, unsure if she deserved such recognition. But with encouragement from Mrs. Harper and Clara, she began applying to conservatories, determined to take her passion further. Each application essay she wrote reflected not just her love for music, but also her resilience, a reminder that talent wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built through perseverance. Despite the accolades, Maria remained grounded. She continued attending rehearsals, practicing tirelessly, and helping her father clean classrooms after hours. Some nights, as they worked side by side, Eduardo would tease her gently. "Maybe we should charge admission for your performances now," he joked, nudging her playfully. Maria laughed, rolling her eyes but secretly cherishing these moments of normalcy amidst the whirlwind of change. Yet, not everything changed overnight. There were still lingering traces of prejudice, subtle reminders that breaking barriers wasn't easy. A few students grumbled under their breath, accusing her of receiving preferential treatment because of her newfound fame. Others questioned whether she truly belonged in advanced ensembles, despite her undeniable skill. Maria chose not to engage, knowing that proving herself once hadn't erased years of bias. It would take time for people to fully embrace her as an equal. But she found solace in the fact that many more stood firmly in her corner, cheering her on at every turn. One particularly poignant moment came during a parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Harper addressed the faculty, reminding them of the lessons Maria's journey had taught them all. "We talk about inspiring our students, but sometimes they end up inspiring us," she said, her voice steady yet emotional. "Maria reminded me why I became a teacher, to help young people discover their potential. And she reminded all of us that greatness can come from anywhere if we're willing to see it." By graduation, Maria had earned multiple scholarships, securing her place at a renowned music academy. On the day of the ceremony, as she stood on stage accepting her diploma, the entire auditorium rose to their feet in applause. Her father sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face, clutching a bouquet of flowers he had saved up to buy. As Maria scanned the audience, she locked eyes with Mrs. Harper, Clara, and even Mr. Carter, each of whom nodded in silent acknowledgment of how far she had come. That summer, Maria packed her belongings and prepared to leave for college. Though excited, she felt a pang of sadness saying goodbye to the town that had shaped her. On her final day, she returned to the school auditorium. Sitting alone on the stage where it had all begun, she played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the first tune she had ever practiced, letting the notes linger in the empty hall. It was a quiet tribute to her journey, a reminder of where she started and how far she had risen. The day of the spring concert auditions arrived, and Maria's stomach churned with nerves. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, practicing late into the night and memorizing every note of Vivaldi's Spring, a piece she had chosen because it reminded her of her father's stories about fields of flowers and warm sunshine. Yet, as she stood backstage, clutching her battered violin, doubt crept in like an unwelcome shadow. What if she messed up? What if everyone laughed at her? The auditorium buzzed with chatter as students warmed up, their instruments creating a cacophony of sound that filled the air. Maria recognized many of them, students who had been playing since they were children, whose parents could afford private lessons and expensive instruments. They carried polished violins and cellos, their cases gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Maria felt out of place, her old violin looking even more worn next to their pristine gear. Still, she took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about proving something to herself. When her name was called, Maria stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the judges might hear it. The room fell silent, save for the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath her sneakers. She glanced at the panel of teachers seated in front of her, their expressions unreadable. Some looked curious, while others seemed indifferent, already jotting notes on their clipboards before she even began. As she adjusted the violin under her chin and raised the bow, she caught sight of Mrs. Harper sitting in the back row, giving her an encouraging smile. It gave her the tiniest bit of courage. Her first note rang out, tentative but clear. Then another and another, until the melody began to take shape. At first, her hands trembled slightly, and she stumbled over a tricky section. For a split second, panic threatened to overwhelm her. But then she closed her eyes and let the music guide her. The world around her faded away, leaving only the violin and the story it told. Her bow moved across the strings with growing confidence, each note flowing seamlessly into the next. The raw emotion in her playing filled the room, turning what could have been a technical performance into something deeply moving. As Maria played, she didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The skeptical looks on the judges' faces softened, replaced by expressions of awe. Even Mr. Thompson, who rarely showed emotion during auditions, leaned forward in his seat, his pen hovering midair as he forgot to write. In the audience, Mrs. Harper wiped away a tear, her faith in Maria vindicated tenfold. By the time Maria reached the final crescendo, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. When the last note echoed into silence, there was a moment of stillness, a pause so profound it felt like time itself had stopped. Then came the applause. It started softly, almost hesitantly, as though the judges weren't sure how to react. But soon it grew louder, filling the auditorium with waves of appreciation. Maria opened her eyes, startled by the sound. She hadn't expected this reaction, not from people who had doubted her so openly. As she lowered the violin, her cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and disbelief. One of the judges, a music teacher named Miss Patel, broke the silence. "Maria," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. "That was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that?" Maria hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, she admitted, "I taught myself, mostly. I watched videos online and practiced whenever I could." The room erupted into murmurs of astonishment. Another judge chimed in. "You've only been playing for a few months." Maria nodded shyly, and the judges exchanged glances, clearly impressed. Even Mr. Thompson, who had initially dismissed her chances, offered a rare compliment. "Well done, Maria. Truly remarkable." Backstage, after the audition, Clara, the senior cellist who had offered to help Maria, approached her with a grin. "Told you you're good," she said, nudging Maria playfully. "Now you'll have to join us for rehearsals." Maria laughed nervously, still processing what had just happened. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. That evening, as Maria walked home with her father, Eduardo noticed the bounce in her step and the sparkle in her eyes. "How did it go?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Maria grinned, holding up the violin. "They liked it, Papa. They really liked it." Eduardo beamed, pulling her into a tight hug. He didn't need to say anything. His pride spoke volumes. What Maria didn't realize yet was that this was only the beginning. Her performance had ignited something in the hearts of those who heard it, not just admiration for her skill. The night of the annual gala finally arrived, and the school auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Families, teachers, and students filled the rows of seats, their murmurs blending with the soft hum of pre-show preparations backstage. Maria stood in a corner, clutching her violin tightly as she tried to calm her racing heart. She wore a borrowed gown, a shimmering navy blue dress, loaned by Mrs. Harper, that made her feel both out of place and strangely elegant. Her father sat proudly in the front row, his hands clasped together, looking more nervous than Maria had ever seen him. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Musicians tuned their instruments, adjusting strings and testing notes under hushed breaths. Maria watched as Clara, the senior cellist who had become her friend, offered last-minute advice to younger members of the orchestra. When Clara noticed Maria standing quietly off to the side, she walked over and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've got this," Clara whispered with a warm smile. "Just focus on the music, not the crowd." As the lights dimmed and the audience settled into silence, Mr. Thompson stepped onto the stage to introduce the program. He spoke briefly about the hard work and dedication of the students, pausing to acknowledge Maria's journey. "Tonight, we have a special solo performance by someone who has shown us all what perseverance truly means," he said, his voice carrying warmth and pride. The audience erupted into polite applause, but Maria barely heard it. Her mind was focused solely on the task ahead. When her name was called, Maria took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she felt frozen under its intensity. Hundreds of eyes stared back at her, some curious, others skeptical. But then she glanced toward the front row, where her father sat beaming, tears glistening in his eyes. That sight gave her strength. She adjusted the violin under her chin, raised the bow, and began to play. From the first note, the room transformed. Zajunarweisen was a fiery, passionate piece that demanded precision and emotion in equal measure, and Maria delivered every ounce of both. Her fingers danced across the strings with newfound confidence, while the bow coaxed out rich, resonant tones that seemed to fill every corner of the auditorium. The complexity of the composition didn't faze her. Instead, she embraced it, letting the music flow through her like a river breaking free from its banks. The audience was spellbound. Teachers who had once doubted her sat upright in their seats, their expressions shifting from surprise to awe. Students whispered to each other, their earlier skepticism melting away with each flawless transition. Even Mr. Thompson, who prided himself on maintaining composure, leaned forward with an expression of disbelief. For those few minutes, nothing else existed outside of Maria's performance. It was as if the entire world had paused to listen. As the final crescendo built, Maria poured every ounce of herself into the music. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her face glowing with concentration and joy. When the last note rang out, the auditorium fell silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just pure stillness. Then, like a dam bursting, the room erupted into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, their admiration unmistakable. Some even wiped away tears, moved by the sheer beauty of what they had witnessed. Maria lowered the violin slowly, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She scanned the audience, overwhelmed by the sea of smiling faces. In that moment, she realized something profound. This wasn't just her victory. It belonged to everyone who had supported her along the way. Her father, whose sacrifices had given her a chance. Mrs. Harper, whose belief had kept her going. Clara, whose friendship had lightened her load, and even those who had doubted her, whose skepticism had fueled her determination. After the performance, as Maria returned backstage, she was greeted with hugs and congratulations from her fellow musicians. Even those who had once dismissed her now offered heartfelt praise. "That was incredible," one girl said, her voice filled barely contained excitement. "I can't believe how far you've come." Maria smiled, feeling a sense of camaraderie she hadn't expected. Later that evening, as she walked home with her father, Maria couldn't stop replaying the night in her mind. The applause, the standing ovation, the looks of astonishment. It all felt surreal. But what stayed with her most was the realization that she had done more than prove herself. She had inspired others to see beyond labels and assumptions, to recognize the power of resilience and passion. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, Maria knew one thing for certain. She had found her voice, and it sang louder than anyone could have imagined.